Hey guys, I hope y'all are having a good week. I hope that y'all are staying safe and that y'all are staying healthy. I'm praying for y'all, and I want um, y'all to know that I'm here for you, even though that we're not in person. You can still contact me. You can reach out to the church, reach out to me. I'm here for you. I want to be here for you. Um, and so tonight we are going to continue our 4-week series called Forever Changed. Um, but before we start, so just a reminder, camp is canceled. However, we want to do stuff here over the summer. So I'll be giving y'all more information about that later. And just a reminder that we do have services online and in person. So hope to see you on Sunday. All right, so jumping in. Sometimes we feel like it's hard to talk about God or Jesus, or because we're not at church. Um, because church is a spiritual place, right? That's where we're expected to hear and to talk about Jesus. But since God created the whole world and every human being reflects his characteristics because we're made in the image of God, then doesn't that mean that everybody we meet and every place that we go, we have an opportunity to talk about Jesus? How do we do that? How do we talk about Jesus when we go to the mall? How do we talk about Jesus when we're in school? Well, we're going to look at Paul's life. Remember, we talked about Saul becoming Paul last Wednesday. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about Paul. And so last week we started a series called Forever Changed. Today is the second session of that. Now, Saul is who we met, and he grew up as a Jew in Jerusalem with one of the best educations money could buy at the time. Now, he personally and passionately pursued Christians to shut them down, to hunt them down, imprison them, because he thought that they were going against God. And so after his encounter with Jesus, he was forever changed and became somebody who preached boldly for Jesus, and he helped others to know and to follow Jesus. And so at some point in the process, Saul started going by Saul. Saul became Paul. Saul started going by the name Paul to represent that he had changed, that he had met Jesus, and he was no longer going to hunt down and kill Christians. And so today we're going to look at his life and learn from what Paul did in the city of Athens. Now, Athens is another important city like Jerusalem. A lot of important people from the New Testament and from just history outside of the New Testament came from Athens. And so it's a really important city. And so we're going to look at what Paul did in Acts as he's waiting for two of his friends, Silas and Timothy. And so we're going to pick up in Acts chapter 17 today, and we're going to start in verse 17. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed, and when he saw that the city was full of idols, the Greeks had a large number of gods that they worshipped. Now, these are gods like Zeus and Poseidon and Athena. And so while Paul was looking around the city of Athens, he noticed all these idols he knew or he saw were false gods, and this bothered him. And so he didn't fire off social media posts and sit and grumble on Twitter and Instagram with his friends about how these people are wrong and how these are fake gods. No, instead he did something that we can learn from. He talked with people in person. I know, it's crazy. You can actually talk to people without a cell phone attached to your hand. I know it's a little difficult right now because of quarantine, but you can still talk to people. You can call them, you can FaceTime them, you can Zoom call them, you can do whatever. He, like Paul did, only Paul was in person, and that's how the gospel really is spread is through personal contact and communication. And so we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. Continuing on in Acts 17 through 18, it says, "So he reasoned in the synagogue, he taught in the synagogue with the Jews who worshipped God, and as well in the marketplace with every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, just people who were teaching philosophical ideas at the time, who were following Epicurus, who is a leading philosopher. That's why they're called Epicurean. And he debated with these philosophers and said, and some of them said, what is this ignorant show off or this ignorant person trying to say? Like, we don't understand. What is he trying to say? And others said, well, he seems to be a preacher of foreign deities because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. And so here, Paul is in the synagogue, which is a place of worship, a church for the Jews. And with Paul's background as a Jew, he used it as common ground so he could go and talk with them. Now, he was trying to show them that Jesus is the rescuer, is the Messiah, and he is the Jesus, the one that's going to save them, the Jews have been waiting for generations. And so, but he didn't limit his conversations to spiritual places. He, or even spiritual people. He talked with philosophers. He went to the public square and met with common people, people who didn't even believe in the God of the Old Testament. They believed in some random Greek God or random Roman God. He talked with everybody who would listen. And he debated with philosophers, probably not in public because they would have, if the philosophers were deemed wrong, then they could have lost the respect of the people. So they probably did that in private. And today, the public square where Paul taught could be a mall, could be a park, could be a restaurant, school, your social media platform, because you don't have to meet in person for conversation to take place. It can happen on the internet if it's done correctly. It's just as effective. But before we jump in, let's see how people responded to Paul. And we're going to look at Acts 22, verses 19 through 34. And so others replied, he seems to be a preacher of foreign deities because he was telling the good news about Jesus. And so they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, which is this court in the middle of Athens. It's on a hill. It's in the center of the city, and all of everybody who's anybody will be there to listen to this. And so the philosophers, they took him and they brought him to this court and said, may we learn about this new teaching that you are presenting, because what you say sounds strange to us, and we want to know what they mean. Now, all of the Athenians, that's the people who live in Athens, and some of the foreigners residing there spent their time on nothing else but telling or hearing about something new. And so everyone who was in the court, whoever was there, was talking about new things. That's what this court was for. And so Paul stood in the middle of this court, the Areopagus, and said, people of Athens, I see that you are extremely religious people in every respect. For as I was passing through and observing the objects of your worship, the idols, I even found an altar on which was inscribed to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in shrines made by hands, neither is he served by human hands, as though he needs anything. Since he himself gives everyone life and breath and all things, he doesn't need it. And so from one man, he made every nationality to live over the entire earth and had determined their appointed times and their boundaries of where they live. He did this so that they might seek God and perhaps they might reach out and find him, though he is not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even as some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Since then we are God's offspring, we shouldn't think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone or an image fashioned by human art and imagination. Therefore, having overlooked times of ignorance, God now commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has set a day when he is going to judge the world in righteousness by the man he has appointed. He's talking about Jesus. He has provided proof to everyone by raising him, Jesus, from the dead. And when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to ridicule him, but others said, "We'd like to hear more about this." And so Paul left their presence. However, some people joined him and believed. And among those were Dionysius, a member of the council, and a woman named Damaris, as well as others. And so that was a lot. But in about half a page, we get a short teaching that Paul gave to the people who invited him to come and share his beliefs. And without being rude, he pointed out the differences between the gods of the Athenians and the God that Paul and all of us worship today. And he goes from a general description of God and how he created everything and gives life and sustains everything to a specific connection with Jesus. When he mentions Jesus being raised from the dead, this is where the story comes to a halt. Because did you notice in verses 32 through 34, some people laughed at him. They ridiculed him. They mocked him. And others said, "We want to hear more about this." And others even joined and believed in him. And so what do we learn from this? What do we learn from what Paul did when he shared the gospel with people who invited him to come and talk? So Paul paid attention to the people and the culture around him. Paul not only observes the religious shrines of the city, but he also knows what their poetry, and he takes time to read inscriptions. He took time to know the people that he was trying to tell people about Jesus. He took time to know the culture, took time to know the religion, took time to know their interests, so that way he could find a stepping point, could find a common ground to talk to them about Jesus. Now, he didn't have to know every single thing about them. He just needed to observe them for a little bit, just to care enough to do it. And the same is for us. We need to pay attention to our friends and our classmates and talk about and listen to them and listen to what they talk about. Listen to what they watch. Just listen to them and talk to them and converse with them. And so just by knowing that you are interested in them will show that they matter to you and possibly give you a common ground and an opportunity, like Paul, to go and talk about Jesus. It's so much easier to talk to friends when you have, or share Jesus with people when you know something about them, because you can say, "Oh, you like M&Ms? I love M&Ms." And then you can talk about M&Ms, and then you have a conversation starter to talk about Jesus. And that's what Paul did. Paul knew what they were interested in, so that way he could tell them about Jesus. The second thing that we can learn is to engage people in conversations. Paul didn't have social media in his day, and so instead he went to where people were. He didn't just stand behind a computer or a phone and type all of this up. No, he went into the cities, into the common places, into the marketplace, into the malls, and he talked to them about Jesus. Went into the places of worship. He didn't just throw scripture bombs at them, didn't just say, "You need Jesus." No. Instead, he had a conversation with them. He connected with them. And if you're going to try to connect with somebody or post something online that connects with your beliefs, you have to do it in a way that will invite genuine conversation. Not just, "Hey, this is what this verse says, and this is why you're wrong." No, because how many of us are going to fight that and say, "Well, who are you to tell me what I can do?" But instead, if I come to you and say, "Hey, like, um, let's talk about Jesus. Like, I know this about you, and so let's talk about how this can talk about Jesus." And so Paul even participated in debates, but he didn't go around with a vendetta to debate and argue with everybody. Instead, when arguments came to him, he respectfully and concisely, meaning he didn't just ramble on, concisely, he shortly and respectfully said, no, this is what I believe, and you're okay if you believe what you believe, but here's what Jesus says. Here's what God says. And he didn't ramble on. He didn't continue on in this long, drawn-out process. Instead, he summarizes and he says, God made everything. God is in charge of everything. Jesus is the one that God's going to use to deliver us. Jesus rose from the dead. And because of that, we have life eternally with God. And that's what he said. And so that's what you have to do. You have to be willing to talk to people about your faith. You don't have to always expect someone to follow Jesus just because you told them about him. But talking with people about Jesus on a real level, more than just, hey, you need Jesus, on a real and conversational level, means that you're real and you're authentic and you're not hiding who you are to please others. And then finally, the last thing that we learned is that you earn the right to be heard when you're respectful and you have genuine conversation with people and you genuinely care about them. See, Paul genuinely cared about the Athenians because he learned about their culture so he could talk to them. And because of that, he was invited into their city, into their courts, to discuss this new thing about Jesus. The Jews and the Gentiles engaged him in conversations. He spoke with people in the squares because he just asked them about their lives and he talked to them. He went to where they were. The philosophers had questions about what Paul was saying, and they invited him to speak in the high council of the city. Either way, Paul answers the questions, and he points out who God is, who Jesus is, and why he's important. And he shares specifically about Jesus because he had a connection with them. He used his connection of being Jewish to talk with these people. You can use your connection as a student. You can use this quarantine. Hey, how are you feeling? You know, like sometimes I feel lonely, but guess what? God is here. Jesus is here, right? Or, yeah, people are sick and people are hurting, but I know Jesus and Jesus heals. Now, that doesn't mean that Jesus is always going to heal everybody, but Jesus can heal. If you have a relationship with him and you talk with him and you pray, right? You can talk to them about quarantine and how Jesus is here in the midst of this. He's not distant. That could be your stepping point. Hey, you have social media, I have social media. You like TV or video games, I like TV or video games. You just have to be willing to look at what you're interested in, look at what others are interested in, and talk to them. And so as a result, people are going to laugh. People are going to be like, I don't want to hear about this. That's funny. That makes no sense. How do you even believe in that? And others are going to be like, interesting. I don't know about this yet, but I want to learn more about it later. And others are going to be like, yes, Jesus is awesome. I want to know Jesus. I want to follow Jesus. Right? But that only happens when you're not hiding your faith, when you're not just, and it also only happens when you're not being harsh and you're not beating people over the head with the Bible. But if you're wise and you're ready to talk when someone asks questions or they invite you to talk, now you don't have to share everything from all 4 books of the gospel. You just be respectful and you just say, hey, this is Jesus. Now, why did I tell you all this? This long process about, you got to talk to people about Jesus. You got to make connections because sharing the good news, sharing the gospel like Paul did in Acts with people who didn't believe in Jesus is what following Jesus is all about. We are called to know and follow Jesus, but we're also called to make Jesus known. We're called to tell people about Jesus. And so when we are forever changed by Jesus, part of that process, part of that change means that you have something to share with others. You have this change, this life to share with others so that they may be forever changed. And you can only do that if you're respectfully talking to them, not posting some harsh um, social media post, but instead you're being genuine and you're talking to them. And so as we go, I want you to think about this. Am I forever changed? Do I know Jesus? And if I do know Jesus, am I drawing attention to the God of creation? Am I drawing attention to Jesus? Because if you're not, why aren't you? If you're not drawing attention, if you're not sharing Jesus, why not? That's what being a Christian is all about. So I know I rambled on, but join us on Sunday and on next Wednesday for our third session of Forever Changed.